Hey folks, it's Joe from Big Fast Customs, and today we're going to do something a little different, and we're going to talk about the thrust bearing failure on this LS truck engine. Now hold on, before you take off and go look at another video, I hear you. I hate LS engines and Henry Ford hates you. Well, you're probably right, but hear me out. This is an LS, but we're going to be talking specifically about this thrust bearing failure, and the info we're going to go over can be useful for basically any engine with a thrust bearing, and as far as I know, that's like all of them. So, you know, maybe you'll get some useful information. If not, maybe it'll just be entertaining. But another thing before we get started, because some people complain, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on LSs or any engine or anything in general. I'm just a guy in my garage showing you me working on my stuff, bring you along. You can maybe see some good information, or maybe you'll get entertained or whatever, but I'm not an expert, okay? If you're here because you have a thrust bearing failure and you're looking for guidance, watch the video, use the info if you can, do some more research, and make sure that you're getting the info that works for your project, okay? Don't just rely on what I'm saying. I'm only gonna show you what I'm seeing here. And if you like what you're seeing here, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. See how I worked that in? I'm getting better. Maybe. But let's get started. Okay, so this is the engine out of my 2006 Chevy Avalanche. And if you guys watched the last video, the shop update video, I told you I had to take this out, basically delaying all the other projects. And I actually started filming it. I started filming taking the engine out. I was going to do a video, take it out, fix it, put it back in. But it was really boring. So I stopped filming. And it wasn't until I got the motor on the stand and started looking at it that I said, okay, well, maybe this would be interesting for you guys. So we're going to show this. Basically, we're going to go over what I found, the possible causes, what I think caused it, how I'm going to fix it, and just as a bonus, I'm going to tell you how I screwed up, did something stupid, and cost myself some extra money. So this is a 2006 Avalanche. It's a late Gen 3 engine, and it's been leaking oil since I got it. I didn't want to change the rear main seal because it's a lot of work, and I was driving the truck, and I just let it go, said I'll fix it in a few months, and a few months turned into a couple of years later. It has gotten worse. Now the front main seal is also leaking. I had a couple of broken exhaust bolts, which is pretty common on these LS engines, and then the radiator went out in the truck. So I said, okay, that's enough stuff that's wrong. I got to pull it apart and work on it so it can be more reliable. I got the engine out, I put it on the stand, and I started looking at things. This engine has 335,000 miles on it. Well, the truck has 335,000 miles on it. And I verified that this block has the same VIN number as the truck, so theoretically it should be the same. I decided I would pull some rod caps because I wanted to see what's the condition after 300,000 miles, and I was pleasantly surprised. The bearings look good, the crank surface looked good. You know, it's a little dirty right now, but they were pretty smooth. If you just showed me the crank and the bearings and said this has 300,000 miles on it, I wouldn't have believed it. It looks really good. So I was starting to get excited because I'd always wondered how bad the bearings were having such high miles. And now I know the bearings are good. We're going to change the oil seals. This is going to be a great engine. Then I checked the crank end play, and I actually did a YouTube short video showing it. I just grabbed the balancer and pulled it in and out, and it moved like over 1/16 of an inch, and yeah, that's way over spec. So I've actually got it torn down now so that I could find all the issues. There's no main caps in it right now. The crank is just sitting in the original bearings in the block. But just for comedy, I thought I'd set up the gauge over here and just show you. Certainly with the caps on, it would probably be a little bit tighter. But the gauge is set at 0. And if you can see this little black tab over here, I've got that set at 10 thousandths. Okay? So the end play on this crank, around 7 thousandths, give or take, is okay. It's acceptable. So let's see what we've got on this one. 45. Maybe I measured it wrong. Let's try again. Nope, 45. So carry the 1. Yeah, that's way out of spec. So I had to take the main cap off for the center bearing is the one that has the thrust surface, or the thrust bearing in it. I took the cap off and I can immediately tell it's not just the thrust bearing. The thrust bearing ate into the crankshaft. So it's a little hard to get the GoPro down in there with the camera or with the light. So here's a picture, and you can see there's a huge, I've got the crank pushed all the way to the back, but you can see there's a huge gap between the bearing and the crank surface, and you can see the crank surface is gouged out. It's got a ridge on it, all of that. And yeah, it's definitely bad. It's not something that just replacing a bearing would take care of. If you imagine like an old brake pad wearing into a brake rotor, that's basically what it did to the crankshaft. So I knew I needed bearings and a crankshaft. That kind of sucks, but I thought, well, I could go to the junkyard and get another crankshaft. That I think would be horrible. You'd have to crawl around under the bunch of trucks, try and find a crankshaft you thought was decent, take it halfway apart to make sure it was decent before you took it the rest of the way out. That sounds like a lot of work I don't have time to do. So I started looking for new crankshafts. I looked on Marketplace. Everybody wanted like $200 for a used crankshaft that had a bunch of surface rust on it, and I was not going to look at that. Summit was already making my wallet cry, but I happened to come across O'Reilly's online had a listing for a crank for this truck. Now the listing was for a reground crankshaft with the matching bearings, and the reviews for it weren't very helpful. There was 2 reviews. One guy complained because it doesn't have a warranty after you install it in the engine, and I understand both sides of that argument. But the other guy complained because it's ground 20 under, and that won't work for his high performance build. That'll only work for a stock build, not his high performance build. And I don't understand why he's looking for a crank on O'Reilly's for a high performance build. So 20 under is fine for me. I ordered the crankshaft. They had a special deal. It was normally $359, but if you ordered online, had it sent to your house, they gave you 15% off. So I got the new crank, or reground crank, with the matching bearings for $300 delivered to my door. In all honesty, it came from Georgia to South Carolina, so not a very long trip. In all honesty, the crank isn't packed super well. I would be worried about the reluctor wheel getting bent, maybe on a longer journey. So, you know, definitely if you buy one, look at the reluctor wheel really close when you get it. But it came with King bearings. All the surfaces look great, so I'm confident in it. I'm going to put that in, and as long as everything specs out, I think we're good. So if I've got all the new parts, I can just put it back together, right? Let me tell you about something stupid I did. I like to use, when I'm cleaning up engine parts or car parts in general that are greasy and nasty, I like to use a 50-50 solution of water and super clean. And if you've got steel, cast iron, plastic, put it in there, let it sit for days or however long you want. It'll eat off all the carbon and the grease, and it'll take off all the paint. It's great. I really like it. I've always been careful with it with aluminum. Until now, I, for some reason, thought, hey, I'm going to take my pistons and I'm going to throw them in super clean, and then I'm going to go to bed. I got up the next day, still not realizing what I did, took the pistons out, and they looked great. There was almost no carbon left on them. Everything was really clean and good looking. Awesome. And I took a plastic brush and I started to scrub the rest of the carbon off, and noticed that the carbon came right off, and so did some of the piston. Yeah, the super clean, I left it in there too long. Maybe it'd be okay for an hour or two, but I left them in there overnight, and it started eating the aluminum on the pistons. If you guys look, those dark spots are not dirt. That is where it ate into the piston, into the aluminum. You can see there's It looks like this thing's been left outside and it's just started to corrode. But yeah, it really started eating into the piston. I did clean one up with a soft wire brush. It cleans up okay. You can see that the piston's been etched into by the super clean. And definitely I wouldn't use these on a performance build. Maybe you could get by with them in a stock build, but I was not willing to risk it for this engine. I need this engine to be reliable. This is my daily driver truck. I trust it for moving me around and moving everything else around that I need to move, Model A parts or whatever. I don't want this to break down again. So I am literally going to pay for that stupidity. And I bought for $220, I got a new set of standard pistons. I did dingle ball hone the cylinders because they all looked good. I just gave them a quick new cross hatching in there, and I did measure the new rings. Every cylinder gapped out at about 21 thousandths, which is on the high end of a stock engine with standard pistons, but it's still in spec. I know that turbo guys go a little bit bigger, so I'm not expecting any problems. The pistons measure out right. Everything looks good. We should be fine. So it cost me a little bit more, but it was my fault. I still love Super Clean for cleaning up these engine parts. I'm just going to keep it away from aluminum. That's my fault. I should have known better, and now I had to pay for it. So we've got a new crank, new bearings, new pistons. We can get this thing all back together, but we need to know what caused this. If I open this up and all the bearings had damage, then I would say, okay, it was an oiling issue or dirt in the oil or something like that. But that's not the case. All the bearings look good except for this thrust bearing. So it's not an oiling issue. And I don't want to put the engine all back together, put it in the truck, and just have it fail again. So we got to figure out, or at least get some idea of what we think caused this. I started doing research on the internet, and that's part of the reason that I'm making this video, because a lot of people on the internet just point to these specific things and say that's the problem. And I don't think that was the problem with this engine. So nobody ever comes back and says, yes, I verified this caused my issue. So I wanted to share this with people because I think this is a little bit different than some of the other videos that people are putting out. It's also important to note that a lot of the people reporting these thrust bearing issues are high performance engines. Either they've got a turbo or they're drag racing the car or something like that. I'm not doing any of that with this truck. The truck is it's a stock engine. I don't try to spin the tires at every stoplight. I don't try to drag race people, and I'm not hauling heavy loads regularly. So this is just a stock, easy daily driver that it's not babied, but it's definitely not beat on. So keep that in mind. It's a little bit different for a turbo engine than a stock engine, but I got a lot of information, a lot of things to go through, and then I just needed to figure out what I thought matched my engine. The first thing people say could be the reason was the engine was assembled incorrectly. They didn't set the end plate correctly, and it caused the issue. Well, this has got over 300,000 miles on it, so if they assembled it wrong, they did it the right way. So I'm going to rule assembly issues out. Basically everything beyond that has to do with the transmission. So this truck has the stock 4L60 transmission that everybody says is glass, but this one's working fine. Again, I don't beat on the truck. But so the transmission, of course, is always pushing on the back of this crankshaft, trying to push it that way. It happens during normal operation. And the thin layer of oil that goes between the thrust surface is what keeps it from basically the crankshaft colliding with the bearing. If the transmission has too much pressure, either because there's something clogged or whatever reason, that can cause it to try and push the torque converter into the crankshaft and push the crankshaft out the front of the engine. It won't push it out the front of the engine, but it pushes on it, trying to push it that way. And that can be a problem. There's actually one video online of I think it's a turbo 400, and they rev it up, and you can actually see the torque converter pushing out of the transmission into the engine. It's interesting. You should look that up. But I can't test the transmission pressure without an engine in the truck. I mean, I could take the transmission out and take it to a shop. At that point, I might as well have it rebuilt. And I don't have Motor Trend money right now. So one of the reasons the trans could have too much pressure is something could be clogged. I will say I've never changed the filter on this transmission. So when the engine gets put back in the truck, I am going to change the filter, all the fluid in the transmission. And once I get it running, I'm going to check the pressure in the pressure lines going up to the cooler in the radiator. I also have a gauge. I have to dig it out from somewhere. I did put a shift kit in my Corvette years ago, and it came with a gauge with a long tube that you could bring inside the car so you could check the pressure at different shift points. And I'm going to use that as well to check and make sure that the transmission doesn't have too much pressure. If it does, then I'll have to deal with that. I'll have to take the transmission out, maybe get it rebuilt or whatever. The last thing that people, again, sorry, one more thing. If you have a manual transmission, people with manual transmissions also have issues. You might need to adjust your clutch or your throwout bearing or whatever. But manual transmissions also seem to put a lot of pressure on the back of this crankshaft, which could cause the issue. But the most often suggested cause, the first thing people usually say is your torque converter is ballooning. I had never heard of the torque converter ballooning. I understand it. Like, your torque converter just starts expanding. I get it. It pushes the crankshaft forward and it can cause a problem. But I had to do some research on that. Again, I haven't done a lot of high performance engines. It's never been a problem for me. What I found is, again, this seems to be more of a problem with high performance engines. I did look, I went to some torque converter websites, the manufacturer's websites. They put out some videos. I watched a bunch of stuff. For a modern torque converter, the torque converter manufacturer will tell you, there's new processes, there's new technology. Torque converter ballooning in a stock type application is really not a problem anymore. If you get into a high performance application, that could be a bigger cause. Then you need to look at, anti-ballooning plates and things like that. But for a stock converter, you shouldn't have the issue. I will say, 330,000 miles, maybe the torque converter is weakening up or something. I don't know. But I really don't think my cause is a ballooning torque converter. Now, I could change the torque converter, throw another couple hundred extra dollars into this build, and just change out the torque converter to have peace of mind. But I'm going to risk it because, I like to gamble, apparently. I really don't think the torque converter ballooning is my issue. The things that can cause torque converter ballooning, of course, is too much pressure or high heat. I did have a radiator go out. Maybe the radiator went out, the transcooler in the radiator wasn't able to keep up, and it started this problem. I don't know for sure, but I don't think my torque converter is ballooning. So yes, we're going to check the transmission for too much pressure, and we'll deal with that if we have to, but I don't think it's the torque converter. So if I don't think it's the torque converter, possibly not the transmission, and the engine I don't think was assembled wrong, what do I think happened here? Do you guys remember why I took the engine out in the first place? Yeah, I needed to replace some oil seals. And I said, I'm going to gamble and not replace those oil seals, and I'll just keep an eye on the oil. Do you know how I kept an eye on the oil? It's a 2006, so when you start the truck up, it says, check your oil level. There's a sensor in the oil pan. If the oil level gets too low, it tells you, check your oil level, and then I would add oil when it needed oil. I don't know what the algorithm is in the computer to tell you on the display when to check your oil, but I will say I've never seen that message while I was driving. Now, I've never run the truck out of oil, but I have driven the truck a long distance, and then the next time I started it up, it said check your oil. So I've run it, you know, to the point where it was giving me a message. I would hope it gives you that message a little before it would be a problem. The gauge in the truck, this truck runs around 20 pounds of pressure, oil pressure at hot idle. And some people say that's too low. Some people say it's not a problem. Maybe the people saying it's not a problem also have thrust bearing issues they don't know about. But so the oil pressure's a little bit low, coupled by me losing oil and not being as vigilant on it as I should be, only letting the truck tell me when it was low. I think this was an oiling issue caused by my negligence. If you look at the, this is the center main cap, and if you look at this is the front side, goes towards the front of the engine, you can see that looks fine. But if you look at the back side, that looks horrible, okay? And the way that these are oiled, I'll put up a picture here of the block side because it's got more of the oiling ability. You can see there's a hole in it and a ditch. The oil pump pushes the oil into that ditch. It spreads the oil around. Your crankshaft rides in here and everything's happy. But the thrust bearings don't have any direct oiling. They get this hand-me-down oil that kind of runs off the side of the bearing while the truck's running. So I would say my oil got too low, if even for a second. There was a collision between the crank and the bearing, and it started this going on. I think this has been going on for some time. I don't think this was an instant type of problem that happened just before I took the truck apart. I think this has been going on for some time. And one of the things I noticed when I took this apart, some of it's come off, but you can probably still see it. So the bearing, this is where the crank runs, and then you can see it kind of wraps around to the surface for the thrust bearing. If you look right around in here, do you see there's material? I'm trying to get that on the camera. So when the thrust bearing started tearing up, it started pushing the material up into this rounded off area. And that's the area where the hand-me-down oil comes through. So there's actually a small ridge all the way around there. And I think it couldn't push oil out that way. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And here we are now. So that's what I think happened. The whole thing was caused by my negligence. Now, I'm very lucky. The truck never ran poorly. It ran fine, always started up. There was no, I had a little bit of a lifter knock, which is common for a high mileage LS. But other than that, everything was running fine. I think I took it apart just in time to save myself from any kind of a catastrophic failure. So, what am I going to do to stop this from happening or try and prevent this from happening in the future? Well, the first thing is I'm going to get a high volume oil pump, or I already have a high volume oil pump. Of course, the original that was on here has got 300,000 miles. We're getting rid of that. I bought a nice name brand Melling high volume oil pump. That's going on for sure. We're going to have all new bearings in here, so immediately my oil pressure should be back up to around 40 pounds where it should be. I'm also going to do a small free modification to the thrust bearing, or the main bearing, that a lot of turbo people recommend, and it makes good sense. So again, this is the top half of the bearing. It doesn't have the little ditch in the middle for the oil like the bottom one does. Throw the picture back up again. Basically, the modification I'm going to do, if you imagine the bearing, let's say this is the back section of the thrust bearing, because it is. If that ditch was running through the center here, like the bottom portion of the bearing, I'm going to take a Dremel and just carve out a small ditch from this middle oil ditch all the way out to this rounded area out here. And what that's going to do is when the oil pump pushes all the oil up into that bearing. It's going to run along this ditch, and then it's going to run out that small ditch I just made and give a constant supply of oil, pressurized oil from the oil pump to that thrust surface. So I think with the new bearings, the high volume oil pump, and this small modification, I think I'm going to protect the engine, maybe even a little better than stock. I think better than stock, because we should be able to get a nice supply of oil to that thrust surface. Once that's all done and put back together, like I said, we still got to check the transmission, but I think this is going to make the engine a little bit better, a little more reliable, and I'm going to have to do some short interval oil changes just to make sure I'm not seeing any sparklies in the oil. Probably the first oil change will be pretty quick. We'll probably see a little bit just because things are wearing into place, but then after that, maybe 500 miles, I'll do it again and see if we're seeing any wear, and I hope we're going to be doing good. I really don't want to do this again. So, guys, I have a lot of cleaning to do on this before I start putting it back together, and I want to get it back together so that we can get back onto some more fun projects. So I'm not going to hold the video up to show you guys putting this back together. It's a normal engine build, stock engine build. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you got some interesting information, something you can use in your own projects, or at the very least, you got to laugh at me because I spent a bunch of money for stupidity. Okay? The whole cause of this, I believe, was my fault. So it sucks, but it's what happens when you gamble on, you know, I'll just keep up with the oil, and you know, this is the end result. So I'm going to get this motor back together, and I'll see you guys really soon. Thanks.